In this video, I'm going to give you just a very brief introduction to pivot tables in Excel. Why? Because they're amazing. They're amazing because they're incredibly powerful, and they're amazing because they're incredibly easy. So what is a pivot table? Pivot table isn't going to create any information. Pivot table isn't going to change any information. A pivot table is going to analyze and summarize information that already exists. A lot of the time what you have in Excel is a big lump of data. I've got some data here. It's all about biscuit consumption. Who ate the biscuits? Which team are they in? Which day did they eat the biscuits? What kind of biscuits and how many of those biscuits did they eat? I imagine you've got very similar data, maybe not so biscuit orientated, but you have similar kinds of data, and the data is a big long list. This isn't a very long list. It's only about 30 odd rows of data. Your data is probably a lot longer and probably wider as well. But even with this data, there's lots of questions I can ask. Who ate the most biscuits? Which is the most popular kind of biscuits? Is there any kind of correlation between Jammy Dodger consumption and which team you are in? A pivot table is going to answer all of these questions for you. It doesn't matter whether you've got 30 rows or 30,000 rows, it's going to do them pretty much instantaneously. First of all, there's a couple of rules that you need to follow when you're getting your data together. And the first thing you need to make sure of is that the top row of data always contains labels. It doesn't have to be row 1, but the top row of the data must contain labels. If I've got a situation like this, this will not work. Second rule, the data type in each column should be the same. So, in this column here, I've got all text. In this column here, I've got all dates. In this column here, I've got all numbers. You should try and make sure that that is the case always. Yeah. The only exception to that rule is the top row can be text, even if the rest of the values in that column can be something else. What you want to try and avoid is this kind of thing. When you've got a mixture of text and numbers in the same column, pivot tables aren't going to like that. The next rule that it's a good idea to follow is that your data should be one-dimensional. This is something which is quite tricky to explain. I'll do my best. What I've got here is each row within this table represents one thing. In this case, it's the amount of Jammy Dodger biscuits that Andy ate on the 1st of April. A good example of similar information in a two-dimensional table would be something that looks like this. So this is the same kind of information. Andy ate 4 Jammy Dodger biscuits on the 1st of April, but this is represented in a matrix style. Here, one row doesn't represent one bit of information. In this case, it represents 4 different bits of information. If you start to use pivot tables more often, you'll find that it's better to have longer tables, which look uglier, take up a lot more space, but just have a single piece of information on each row. The last rule in terms of getting your data in the right configuration is to make sure that your data is, and here's a horrible word, contiguous. And what that means is you don't want to have any blank rows or any blank columns. A good example would be this kind of configuration. It's again the same information, but this time someone has separated everything out into the blue team and the yellow team, and now I have a blank row of data here. It would be the same problem I would have if this data here and this data were on separate sheets within Excel. Pivot tables, certainly in 2007 anyway, aren't very good at summarizing information that comes from more than one place. So make sure you've just got one big lump of data that includes everything. And again, don't worry about the fact that this is big, long and ugly. The place where you store the data and the place where you view and analyze the data should not be the same. So it doesn't matter that this is ugly because the pivot table is going to be beautiful. Anyway, enough about the theory. Let's go ahead and actually create our pivot table. So to create the pivot table, select one cell anywhere within the data set. Doesn't matter which cell you select, as long as you just select one cell and it is within this data area. And then go up to the Insert ribbon and then choose Pivot Table. A dialog pops up and says, first of all, is this the correct range? And you can see here it's put the dancing ants all the way around the edge of my pivot table, and because my list is, here's that horrible word again, contiguous, it will guess correctly. If it didn't guess correctly, you could just overtype in here and select the correct range. Second question it asks is, where do you want this pivot table? It's going to default to a new worksheet, and most of the time that's going to be the correct answer, and that's what I'm going to choose. So I'm just going to say OK. So what's happened here is it's created for me a brand new sheet It's put on that sheet an empty pivot table, and it's opened up this extra pane at the side here called the pivot table field list. The pivot table field list contains the fields that come directly from my table. If you remember, these were that top row of data, and that's why it was so important to have labels of those rows. And the other thing it's got down here is 4 boxes called report filter, column labels, row labels, and values, or summary values actually. And the idea is I'm going to be able to manipulate this data by dragging these fields into these boxes. Let me show you how it's done. The first thing to try and work out is what is it that you're trying to analyze. If my data was all about timesheets, it'd probably be hours that I'm analyzing. If it was a whole load of invoices, it would be money that I was analysing. In this case, my data is all about biscuits, and specifically, it's the amount of biscuits that I want to summarise. Generally, but not always, the thing that you want to summarise will be a numeric column. So the one that I'm looking for here is the one that's called amount, and that is the data that I want to summarise, so that is the one that I can drag into this corner box which says summary values. That M on its side is the Greek letter sigma, and that's what Excel uses for summary. Drag and drop, and you'll see that automatically it changes into sum of amount, and the pivot table changes to just show the grand total of the amount of biscuits that have been eaten across the entire week. So far, not too impressive. I could have done that lots of different ways. What's impressive is what I can do next, because now I can take those 93 biscuits and split them up and just see how many of those were eaten by each person. I'm going to take this name field and drag it into row labels and drop. And now you can see what it does is it breaks out those 93 biscuits by the people who ate them. So it's summing up all of the biscuits that Andy ate, and it's giving you a total there for each of the people, and then a grand total down at the bottom. I could have put that name field into either row labels or column labels, and it would have given me broadly the same information, just with either my labels across the top or the labels down the side. Again, one of the things I really like about pivot tables is the fact I can change my mind, and very quickly I can say, actually, I'm not interested in seeing this broken down by person. I'd like to see it broken down by biscuit. And it's very quick to get rid of a field just by dragging it onto the spreadsheet. You'll see a little cross by the side of it to get rid of it, and then to add it in like so. You're not just limited to having one field displayed here. It's very straightforward for me to have more than one. I'm going to show this information by biscuit and by name. Now this is showing me a matrix. This number 6 means that Andy has eaten in total 6 custard cream biscuits. I can change that information around, so I can put biscuits in the row labels and name in the column labels to switch that around. Now what was interesting is what happened halfway through that operation. Halfway through that I had both biscuits and names in row labels, and hopefully you can see what it's done here. It's given me subtotals. This number 33 is the total number of custard creams that have been eaten, and that is broken down into the people who ate custard creams. And what I really like about this is I can just swap these over. You've got to be very careful with your mouse, but I can just move name just slightly above biscuit, and boom! Now I've got names broken down by biscuit consumption. And if I want to, I can have something else in column labels, and now I've got a nice little matrix that showed me who ate what kind of biscuit on what day. Now, there's one area that we haven't really used so far, and that is the report filter area. So if I use this team field here and drag that down to report filter, to start off with it looks like nothing much has changed, but you can see here this in A1 and B1 you've got this new feature here. So what this is a filter that will filter the entire pivot table. At the moment it's set to all, but if I use this I can just show just the yellow team or just the blue team. So that's the basics of creating your pivot table, and what's brilliant about it is the way that I can change my mind and just say no, actually I want to change this and have a different configuration. Very, very straightforward to make sure I get just exactly the kind of information the way that I wanted to see it very, very quickly. So that's the basics of creating your pivot table. In the next video, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks to make this even more powerful.